The hardest part was watching this man who honestly, up until within 48 hours of death, still thought he was going to live. She said, "I'm dying, aren't I?" And it's like, yes, you are. I feel like they're both with me right now. I just got to tell you because my room has got so cold. And it felt like someone was tugging at my blanket and I was shitting myself, to be honest. You will start seeing things that you never saw before. I don't fear death.
Don't Be Caught Dead, the show bringing stories of death back to life. Here's your host, Catherine Ashton.
In today's episode, I'm talking with Emily Kisvarda, an integrated healer, author, researcher, alchemist, teacher, and lifelong student of learning. She also has the ability of accessing higher knowledge and wisdom. I can't wait to actually speak to you today, Emily. Thanks for being with us.
And thank you for having me, Catherine. It's such a pleasure to be here.
So we met about 2 weeks ago at a networking function over breakfast in our Mornington area.
Yep.
Was really touched with your personal story. You are no stranger to loss.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind sharing some of that story with us, Emily?
Oh, with pleasure. So, well, it was great meeting you. And I have to say, like talking about that meeting, I think you were probably the first one that really got my attention because this is something that is so dear to me and so close to my heart, and I know it all too well. I understand grief, I understand loss, and I understand the trauma that comes from grief and loss. So my story started just before I turned 30 years old. And my husband had actually been in a car accident. It was 3 weeks after my third child was born. Anyway, he had had a scan done because he needed to have some surgery, and they had found this little lump in his stomach. And they said, "Look, you'll need to look into it later, blah, 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 blah. But for now, everything's okay. We'll go ahead, we'll do the surgery and whatnot." So we'd gone and he'd had a couple of tests done, and we were told everything looked fine. It was just a benign tumor, not to worry about it, all be good. He had another scan 12 months later, and he wasn't feeling so well. And this was just before my 30th birthday. This was 2002, it must have been. And so he went back to his doctor. The doctor thought, "Oh, yep, we'll just put you on some antacid and you'll be okay." So he also then told the doctor about what had happened, a couple of years prior to that. And so he said, "Come on, let's send you off for some scans." So he went off to have his scans and they came back. They weren't good at all. So on my 30th birthday, we'd gone to see a specialist who basically told us that his prognosis was that he had probably 6 months to live. He had a very rare form of tumor. Its abbreviation is the DSRCT. And they actually had to send some samples off to Sydney because they didn't even know, they couldn't even diagnose it at the time here in Melbourne. Yeah, he had 6 months to live, and it's basically palliative care. That part of my life, I don't know, I think part of it, you blank it out a bit, but you then got to pull yourself together and you've got to start fighting. And he was such a remarkable man. He was given 6 months. He lived 2 years. He'd also had major surgery, which he had. It was called a Whipple's procedure, where they took like 2/3 of his stomach, part of the bowel. Like, they couldn't get all the cancer, but he went through radiation, chemotherapy. He was a fighter. For me, the outcome of that was that he became my pillar of strength. So even though my background is nursing and I was able to nurse him at home until he passed away, he showed me a totally different side of life. And he gave me something that I wouldn't have found if it wasn't for our situation, the critical situation that unfortunately also was his death. But what was even sadder was 2 weeks before his passing, his brother, his younger brother, had died of an overdose, and he had been a drug addict probably all his life. And it was just the most, it was like, for his parents, I feel like they're both with me right now. I've just got to tell you, because my room has got so cold. But his parents, you can't even fathom what, the parents still living who have just lost two of their children, we've lost two children in 2 weeks. And David's could have been prevented. But sadly, when you go down that line where you're dealing with people who are not good people, things like this can occur. My husband at the time was actually in hospital, and because he was just so sick that I actually had to go to the hospital, take him out to take him to the funeral. And it was just awful. But then, he went back to hospital the week before he passed. The doctor had actually come up to me and he said, take him home, let him go home to die, because that's really what he wanted to do. When he actually realized he was dying, he said, I'd like to, just be at home. But I said to the doctor, I said, you need to go and tell him he's dying. Like, you could clearly see he wasn't going to get better. But in his head at that point, he was still not dying. And so the doctor actually went in. He is Mitchell Chipman, an amazing, amazing oncologist. He went in and he said, mate, go home, live your days out, because there's nothing we can do for you. And he did. We took him home and we set up the room so that, we brought in a hospital bed a couple of days before he passed. And so it was set up correctly, that we could go through the right procedures with him as well. And it wasn't until like 2 days before he passed that he actually turned to me and he said, I know I'm dying. And it was like this relief actually for me, because I'd already set the funeral plans. I had done everything, but I couldn't even talk to him about it because, he didn't have it in his head that he was going to die, but he was fully with it, like totally compass all the way, even to the last breath. And he is a brilliant man. And he was, he knew every password, every code, everything he needed was already, it was still, all within his mind. So 2 days before he died, he said, okay, I think I need to give you all the passwords to everything. That included like 2-hour accounts, because he did everything. I didn't do anything. And I remember, even at one point with my sister, I said to her, oh my God, I rang her crying because I said, I don't even know how to do the banking. How do you do, we were already doing internet banking at that point, but I didn't know how to do any of it. She had to teach me how to do everything. Anyway, that 2 days before, not only did he give me all the personal codes, he gave me every single code to every account. And I'm telling you, off his head. He didn't have to go and look up anything to go, they've written them down. He knew it all off by heart. And he gave me all the codes to work. He gave me all the codes to home. And,
You're so fortunate that he was that lucid right up until that point that he could
very,
share that information.
yeah, very. It was the hardest part was watching this man who honestly, up until within 48 hours of death, still thought he was going to live, because that was his mindset. He was such a remarkable man. And he gave me strength like there is no other. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be where I am today, because he opened up the most magnificent door for me. And I'd like to also put into that, I never actually spoken aloud about it, but when he was very sick, there was 2 times I actually went through a situational depression. And I remember there was one time, like, I got so bad, I actually lost, it was like I just lost it. And my mum and dad were over at the time, we were at home. And I remember was sitting eating and I couldn't contain it. I couldn't control myself. And I went into my bedroom and I could not stop crying. And my dad, like, I guess in his eyes, it was like, you're going to have to stop crying. I'm going to have to get the doctor in to help well, I don't know if subdue is the right word, but to help you, because you've got to pull it together. You can't be like this. The kids were there, it was one of those situations. And I just knew I needed to go and get some help because, yes, I got myself out of bed every day, but, I was looking after 4 children under 10 and looking after my husband, and I took on that responsibility and I couldn't do it. Like I needed that help. And I'm a very big believer that pharmaceuticals are there for a reason when it's needed. I probably was on them for about 6 months and I weaned myself off them and I was okay. But after he died, I went back to the doctors and I got put back on them again. Again, it was probably only 6 months, and I needed that to help me get through the hardest days of my life, because it was like, here I am, a single mother, 32, with 4 children under 10, trying to work out who's going to want me. That was what I thought about. And how am I going to get these kids? How am I going to bring them up on my own?
And especially at that time when you think that it was only 2 days before his death that you were given that information that allowed you to function after he died in a logistical, practical, everyday, how do I get money out? What bills do I need to pay? Those sort of things.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. My whole world changed, my whole world, but in more than one way. I was, my beautiful mum, she was there. She would come and stay a couple of nights. My sisters were amazing. Even, I could never get over my in-laws and how amazing they were at the time. But they were very old school too. So they never dealt with the situation as a couple. They never, I honestly, to how they really got through, even today, I just go, the pain that well, my mother in law sadly passed away as well. But the pain that they would have endured having lost those 2 children in 2 weeks, first an overdose and then one to cancer. I couldn't fathom. I couldn't, you and I can't fathom what would that mean to lose your children, and I guess there is that, I know, I'm very aware that there's that for me, that the whole fear of losing a child before your time, that's, yeah. So I don't usually go there, but I'm aware of that thought. I know where it comes from. And, I just have to go, we're here to live our best moments and do it in the moment, in the present moment. And then, yeah, so then 3 years later, my mum sadly passed away of breast cancer. And I have to say that was probably harder than losing my husband. And I say that because for me, my mum was my rock. My mum was my everything. She was my owl. And, I have created a deck of cards, and the actual, the representation is my mum, because she
Oh,
is the
wow.
owl of
That's so
wisdom.
beautiful.
She is my owl of wisdom. And, you know, our mother, they give birth to us. And I've been so blessed in my life to have, the most beautiful parents. And my dad, he's still with us, thankfully. But, I'm so grateful to my parents for the upbringing we've had, because regardless of what you still experience growing up and, the lessons we're here to learn and our own things that we go through, I have had such an amazing upbringing. Like, I can honestly tell you. So losing my mum, who was my everything, you speak to them every day on the phone, even though you see your husband every day, you've had children, with your husband, whatever. It's not the same. Well, it wasn't for me. And that was probably the hardest thing really going through was that. And, when I think, here I am telling you how my husband never thought he was going to die. Well, my mum never saw that either, really. And it was hard with her because she heard when she was first diagnosed, they pretty much said, you have a 10% chance of it ever coming back. We got it. That she did her chemo, radiation, she did it all. She had the lumpectomy and went into remission. And it wasn't really that long after that, she started feeling unwell again. And it was like, what the hell, going back and having to relive this all over again. And you just think, why? I mean, things in life happen for us, not to us. And I'm a very big believer in that. Saying that even though that individual is experiencing that illness, it's also there for the loved ones around them, or maybe for a friend that is there, because there's an aspect of that illness, there's an aspect of the whole situation that there's something for you to learn from that. And there is plenty for me, I guess, when I look back at her, but it was the hardest thing. And she never responded well to pharmaceutical medicine either. It actually sent her loopy, like I'm talking loopy, to the point where there was a couple of times I had to call like the CAT team. That's them.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, I can't believe I'm doing this to my mother, but the medication she was on was no good for her. And it was just the saddest thing to watch. But again, my mum didn't always see that she was dying. And it wasn't until she was in hospital and she never came out. But I remember she was sitting on the toilet. I can't remember the reasoning quite why behind it, but she actually said to me it was the first time for me, for whatever she might have said to my dad or my sisters may be different, but she said, "I'm dying, aren't I?" And it's like, yes, you are.
How hard was it for you to say that?
Very, like, it makes me well up, but, just thinking back about it, the innocence of it all. It was funny, I was telling my kids I was doing this interview, my son's like, "Are you gonna cry?" Like, "Nah." It still hits you.
Yeah, it does.
My gifts were unlocked when my husband passed away. The gifts that I work on and still working on and will work on until my passing to come.
Yeah, you mentioned it that a door opened. Can you talk us about what happened?
When my husband passed away, my very first realization that something was different that I hadn't felt before was we were sitting outside on my balcony, and where we lived was the biggest deck I've ever seen anyone own, to this time. And it was all undercover. So rain couldn't get in, let's put it that way. And I was sitting on the deck and I just went, oh my God, is it raining? Like, what is going on? I could feel what felt like drops of water on my face. And I'm going, it's not raining. What am I feeling? Anyway, over the course of the next few weeks, what started happening was I wasn't experiencing a sensation that was that sixth sense that, it was experiencing spirit. And I'm sure the whole time it was my husband. So I'd be in the kitchen, I remember 3 weeks later, and I'm walking, and all of a sudden I felt like I was walking through spider webs. And I remember going, oh my God, what's going on? This is it was starting to scare me, because then what started happening was I'd be lying in bed. And at that point I had a television in my room. And I was setting it to go off 30 minutes sort of after I knew I would probably go to sleep, because it felt like there was someone in my room. And it felt like someone was tugging at my blanket all the time, my doona. And I, was shitting myself, to be honest, going, didn't like that. And so I started sleeping with my light on, and I was like, oh my God. During this period of time as well, I found myself being drawn to crystals. So just also, my background is nursing. So I already had that aspect of the nurturer and the healer on that level of that Western medicine. So I found myself being drawn to crystals. So I'd be walking past a shop, for example, that would have jewelry with crystals inlaid in it, or I walked past a crystal shop, and it was like, I'm not kidding you, it was like all of a sudden someone would stop me in my tracks and turn my head to the side. And I'm like, what's going on? And pushing me into the door. And so I had to go in to look at these products. And then I started finding myself buying these products. And so I started finding myself going more to crystal shops because that's what I seemed to be really drawn to. And I found myself, looking around. And when there was something I was meant to buy, it was like someone would stop me, turn me. And I mean, it felt like I was physically being turned to go and look
Wow.
at a crystal. So, of course, over the course of 2004, here I am buying crystals. I had no idea what to do with them. But what was happening was, as I was buying these crystals, I would like put them on a part of my body, not knowing what I was doing. But I also felt sick doing it because I had no idea. And because it's understanding that everything is energy and crystals are energy, and every crystal also has its own specific energetic signature. And certain crystals are going to have a higher frequency than others. So when you start working with these higher frequencies and your body isn't at that level, it's, you're actually bringing it into your energetic field, and it starts to shift your vibration, your frequency. So when you're not used to it, it can actually make you feel quite nauseous. And it's something you've got to work towards. You do it slowly, but I had no idea what I was doing.
And Emily, so is that based on the principle that we're all matters with energy around us and you need energy?
Yep. Everything is matter, and matter is energy. Energy is matter is consciousness. So when we think about it in that way, it's matter that created form. And, so everything is energy, even to the chairs that we're sitting on, the tables that's in front of us. It's just that we are at such a different vibration. What we're looking at is something that is solid. But if you were to match the frequency, say, of the table, you could probably find that you would be able to put your hand through that table, so to speak. So, yeah, coming back to that, I thought, okay, I need to start doing a course, or I need to start looking into what it is I need to do. And so the very first thing I did is I found this lady, and she did this course on crystals and how to work with crystals in healing. And of course, I sort of jumped the gun. The other women that were in the class at the time already had done some form of Reiki or energy healing, where I'd done nothing. I had no idea what I was doing. So after I'd done her course, my neighbor at the time, she said, "Oh, why don't you come and do Reiki? Let's do Reiki together." I'm like, "Oh, I didn't really want to, but I thought, yep, all right, okay." So that's how my journey started. It was really going to things that I was interested in being shown. And, from there, going from one thing to another to another. And over the course of the years, I've done a number of courses. I've also taught some of my own courses. But what eventuated from that was crystals were the very first thing. I used to sell crystals as well. I was a very big crystal seller before I did anything else, as the time went on. And what I then started doing was I would get a crystal and I would put it in water. And I started having this idea that I could make these essences. No idea what I was doing, but I thought I'd start playing. And this was all before 2010, mind you. And I decided, I really need to go and learn. There's something I'm doing. I'm not quite sure what, but it feels right, but I don't know if I'm doing it correctly. And I ended up finding a lady who I spent many years learning under, and she was my teacher, for a long, long time, and wonderful. But what was so amazing is that what it taught me was that everything that I was doing was actually correct. Plus, she showed, there are other things that I was learning to whys. It was the whys and the hows of it all, which was absolutely beautiful. And with all of this that I was doing, understand that it was also helping me work with my grief and my sorrow, my loss, my trauma. And, we're always working on shifting elements and aspects of ourselves. We're learning to let go. We're learning, that old energy we need to release so that we can let that new in. So we're always working on self. As far as I'm concerned, it's lifelong, it's learning that element, that aspect specifically to learn to love, to be loved. And then it's also about raising consciousness. It's about creating the awareness, that awakening aspect of who we are. And for me, these are two of the greatest things that, to me is what we're here to truly learn.
And so just recapping on that, Emily, so it's our energy and where we sit with our energy. And then the other thing is consciousness.
Yeah.
Would that be the two things that you're focusing on?
So, in terms of what I'm saying, is that I think there are two main things that we need to learn in this lifetime. That is to love and to be loved and accept love, and to create an awareness consciousness. So it's an open heart, open mind. These are the two aspects that I believe we are truly here to learn. And then there's everything on the outer or in between of that comes with it. These are what I believe we are here to do. My teachings, my learning, my research, and a lot of this has come through the work that I've channeled. So, it's learning everything is energy. So everything that I do now is all based around energy, frequency, and vibration, because everything is energy.
And this isn't a new concept, is it?
No, not at all.
I've heard a story whereby there's a particular religion that bring the people who are specialists out to Australia to
Mm,
work out where the energy fields
mm.
are as the best place to actually put their temple.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's all to do with geomancy. Yeah, absolutely. You look at Egypt, you look at every sacred site around the world, they're all built on ley lines and vortexes. And the ancients knew exactly where to build because it was where the highest levels of energy were going to come from, and for them to utilize within their temples, within their structures. You look at all the pyramids around the world. They're not just placed anywhere, they're placed in very specific locations everywhere around the world. They knew exactly what they were doing, and people are doing that now as well.
Yeah, I attended Stonehenge last year when I was in the UK, and there is no mistake in any of that layout.
No mistake. Yeah. I hope to go next year. That's my big thing. And what you've got to also understand, just as we're talking about the sacred sites, is that when you're in these places, you have to understand that whether you're aware of it or not, you will receive some form of activation being there, because you're within a certain frequency that is of a very high frequency, and your body is absorbing that energetic field because your body is within that perimeter. So this is one of the reasons too why I take people, or for me, going to these sacred places, taking people to these sacred places, is because I know that you will receive some form of activation, whether you're aware of it or not. You will go through some form of shift. Like, if you think about what you did last year, if you were just to go back to that time of, coming back from Stonehenge and maybe some of the other sacred sites within the area, because you would have done them. Can you say you came back, like even before you left? Were there any, slight shifts that you felt? Or when you came home, is there something that impacted you enough that to go, I need to change something? Something doesn't sit right within my life. And you're not maybe even realizing the reason why.
Yeah, for us personally, it was quite a shift that we experienced. I think we'd lost our friend earlier in the year in February. We travelled to the UK. We were seeing relatives over there. So we went round quite a few significant sites. And then we also travelled to Italy to settle our son who was living over there. So it was quite an emotional time.
Yeah.
But What was quite healing, I think, is that just that process of actually going to a northern hemisphere when we're in a southern hemisphere and experiencing that time shift that we went through in just, I suppose, energy. I think that that helped with resetting how we felt.
Yeah. And it's, it may be only small or subtle things, but when even me saying this to you now, even after this podcast, you might get off and you go, you know, let me think a little bit more into it. Maybe when you were there, it was your reason to start these podcasts or to start the business that you did, or I don't know if that was already out by then. Sorry. So,
No, I hadn't started recording at that stage.
right. So the ideas that you can get, having been there will go, okay, I need a little bit of a lifestyle shift, or look, it's for so many reasons. And my journey with these kind of, for me, personal journeys to these sacred sites started back in 2010 when I went to Sedona. So I actually used sacred sites to go and heal aspects of myself that I was still dealing with because I knew I needed that release. But my higher self knew that this is where I needed to go. And yes, I was fortunate enough to be able to afford to go to these places as well. So and not everyone can afford to travel overseas to go to these places. But even if you do the research, you will find there are sacred sites even around where you live. It might even be you can go up to Queensland and go to some of the mountain areas around there. You might go to certain sacred rivers or water holes where you can go and have that time to have your own little sacred ceremony, if you will, and to go through, this is what I'm here for. I'm looking to create release, I'm looking to soothe and heal the heart, because this is what we go through when we go through loss and grief and trauma. We need to heal the heart, we need to soothe the soul, the sacral, the wounding that comes from all of the loss. As you said earlier, trauma is held within the body, and our body is our temple. Our body is here to express itself and say, hey, are you listening? And if it's not coming through your body, it's coming through your car. Because, when we discussed earlier, there is a book called The Body is the Barometer of the Soul. And in that book, you can also have a look, and it talks about your car. You go, oh, I've got this issue with it. Let me look it up. What's it telling me?
And that's when I was mentioning, I should say, Bessel van der Kolk's book
Yes.
about
Yes.
the body keeps the score.
Absolutely.
While you were talking there, Emily, I thought of the fact that both my husband and I, when we were in the UK last year, we both had that experience of traveling in the footsteps of our ancestors.
Yeah,
And that was really super powerful for both of us.
absolutely. Yeah, I think so.
And is that something that you also discuss in the work that you do, that ability to connect with, I suppose, that energy from ancestors past and those sort of areas?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, when we look at the ancestors and we look at ancient civilizations, going back that far, because it's understanding we are all connected. We are all part of the one. And, when we can look back and we can see, like, I'm going back on a larger scale, but, when we look at ancient civilizations, we look at how highly advanced they were. You look at that point that's pre-Diluvian, so that point sort of past 12,000 years ago. Then we had the big cataclysm that occurred. And it was like we came, for those that survived and then for those that came after, it was more like we've come back with amnesia. It's their non ability to remember. And, so you have to start questioning how did things, what did survive? How were they built? How were they created? Where did the technology come from? I think what's very important to understand is that Everything that has occurred within this universe is held within our cellular matrix. All the answers we're ever needing are already within us. So many of the times we're looking externally to find answers, but the answers that we truly seek are already within you, and you'll find them. And what I love is that when we do go back to these places, that we, did you go back when you're tracing these lines, or, going back in the footsteps of your ancestors? Were there times where you actually felt such an alignment, or just this inner knowing that, your hairs stand on end and you go, oh my God, I'm having this aha moment, or you just know something, or, it might even be some aspect of deja vu, and you go, I know it. I feel it. I've seen it. There's something here.
I've certainly had experiences of deja vu on regular occasions, actually, but I didn't experience that when I was reconnecting with my grandmother's house and where she was born and where my great aunt was born. But I did have an immense sense of pride and connection, and to feel that they walked in these same steps. They pruned these trees that are still existing. So that was pretty amazing for me. And to look out the window that my great grandmother looked out when she was a housemaid was pretty amazing.
Beautiful. And I feel that what I'd like to say to you is this, is that as you start to shift more and more in consciousness, which is our awareness, you will start seeing things that you never saw before. And what I mean by that is that you become hyper aware of your surroundings and everything within it. So that you'll be talking. It's like people go, oh my God, it's 111, it's 222, it's 333, it's 444. It's not all about numbers, but numbers is a fantastic start because, we're born within this matrix we are in. The matrix is the womb. Okay. We are here. It's like we come in with amnesia. Not all, because some of the children coming in today are already so awakened, it's not funny. But what I'm trying to say is this: you will start talking, and for example, like me last week, I was talking to a friend and I was about to tell her how I wanted to give up on something, but I'm not quite there. It was actually the day I met you. A couple of weeks ago this happened. And, I was just talking about giving, in my head going, "Oh, I'm gonna give up on something," and then going, "Actually, but no." And before I could even say anything, I've looked up and I see 3 pelicans flying by, and I'm like, "Oh my God, pelicans." And there's 3, and then my girlfriend goes, "Oh, but it's 333 as well." But when you start looking up the meanings of these, 3 is expansion. That's the first thing. It's about three, creating that joy and harmony within your life. The pelican is all about abundance, but it also can be a representation of the phoenix, the birth, the death, the rebirth cycle. It could mean, in one sentence when I did look it up, it's about, don't give up, because what you're doing is you're on the right track. Sometimes things don't happen the way we want them to happen, but that's okay, because we're here to learn and not give up. But maybe and you've got to look at a different way of doing something. It might be that, like, I guess I'm picturing you looking out the window of your grandmother's house, and there may have been a butterfly or an insect or a flower that, that just stuck out to you. And then there's that symbolism behind it. See, everything has symbolism, and it's here for us. That is a part of our learning. It's that awareness that we can take on. Before I ran my tour to Egypt last year, I kept getting, because I was in my head, I was toing and froing. What am I doing? What am I doing? But all I kept seeing was dragonflies, dragonflies. And I'm not kidding, to the point that I saw, and I wish I'd picked it up even to this day, even though it was dead, but it was the biggest, most beautiful dragonfly I've ever seen. Dragonfly is all about looking past the illusion. What are you telling yourself? We create the illusions within our lives, But again, it also is a part of that birth, death, rebirth cycle as well. It's about, just because you might be seeing something some way or thinking of it some way doesn't mean that that's the actual way it's occurring. It's just the way that you're creating this story in your head. Or it's like the news we're watching, look at the last few years and what the crap we've been subjected to. A lot of it becomes an illusion because it's mind control in the way they want you. This is how they want you to perceive it. But in actual fact, it's not. It's like last year in Egypt when, the war broke out. Egypt was totally unaffected. But back here, they made it sound like, oh my God, you're in a war zone, get out of there. Probably safer than being here in our own state, with the politicians that we had. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I make a point every morning to read multiple news sources, and
Yeah.
they're all different. But what I'm
Yes. So
fascinated about is, how does someone learn what you're talking about?
for me, it's the research that I've done. It's listening to your gut, your intuition as well, because your intuition is the GPS of the soul. And a lot of people, they ignore it. But when you're in tune with your higher self, because when we channel information, most of the time you're actually getting that information from your higher self, even if it comes through as, like, for example, a lot of my, before I went to Egypt in 2017 to 2018, for about a year, a lot of what I was channeling came through Thoth, okay, the god of wisdom. But I know it was still my higher self, but it was the aspect of him that came through. And that was what I was writing. So, it's about getting in tune with your intuition. It is so important. What I was going to say before was, a week leading up to my mum's death, I kept having this dream. Now, not many people have prophetic dreams, which means that it comes true. And I have to say, there's only 2 times that I've actually had a prophetic dream. But this one, all I kept seeing was the time 4 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 4 o'clock. And I'm going, oh my God, what is this all about? Anyway, I think I knew deep down what it was about. And I'd written to my auntie, so my mum's sister, and immediate, like my sisters and my dad at the time, and said, look, keep having this dream, and it's repetitive about 4 o'clock. The day before my mum died, we had a meeting with the nurse that night, and, it was like, okay, are we going to sit vigil? And all I could think about in my head was, no, we don't need to. Like, it's not a necessity at this point. Because what I realized in my head that I was saying is like, she's not going to die before 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That was
Yeah,
what I
right.
kept feeling. Anyway, my sister's like, okay, I'm going to stay overnight with mum. And I said, look, that's beautiful, but I don't believe she's going to die tonight. Anyway, came to the next day, mum was still with us. And as the day, we all came in because we knew she was dying. And what was interesting was I just kept saying to her, can you see your dad? Can you see my husband? And even though she couldn't talk and her eyes were closed, she could, because they say the last sense to go is your hearing. And so she could definitely hear me and she could understand me. And I kept saying to her, can you see Rob, which is my husband's name? And she kept going like this. And it was probably, I don't know, within the hour of her passing, maybe, I asked her again. And, like I kept talking to her and taking through, the visualization that I guess, we feel could exist in terms of, walking up this set of stairs and this beautiful white and golden light being behind it. And, who could you see up the top of the staircase? And then I remember saying to her at this point, can you see Rob? And she actually nodded yes. And it was like, oh my God. But my mum passed away at 4:01 p.m. And
Wow.
it was like, oh my God. Like, my dream has been telling me this is the time she will be passing. And I remember when we were waiting in the room for the funeral directors to come take the body. And all I could hear so loud and clear was thank you in my head. And my mum was just there talking to me and talking to me. And I remember, a little while after, like Dad decided he wanted to sell some pieces in the house, like the furniture and whatnot. So I don't know if you or your audience have ever had experiences with the afterlife. And another beautiful way in which we can actually see these divine souls around us is through orbs, or you may see silhouettes. There are so many different ways, but when I'd taken these photos, the most magnificent orb was on the couch, and it was all rainbow colors, and I knew that specifically was my mum.
And is that a ball of light?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And they can present themselves in different ways though. Sometimes there'll be different colors. There'll be like I've got pictures of, people at a pink party, and there are orbs in there that are pink because they match the color of the party. I have this picture of when my husband first died, and understand that I wasn't into all this at the time. Like I was, I probably was only just starting to learn. It was the first time at 32 that I even ever went and saw my first psychic. And it was her that said things again to me that really opened my eyes and went, oh my God. Like, for example, I'll just go back to it, but she actually told me it was like the Last Supper. That's how I call it. It was the last time my husband had a game of cards at our home, and they were playing in the lounge room. And she actually visualized the whole thing and could tell me even where my husband was sitting. Like, it freaked me out. But some, when they're good, they can really, some can really hone in on these things. But I have this beautiful picture. I'll have to share it with you. I can send it to you. We had gone to Walhalla with the kids, and a friend of mine, it was my husband's best friend. And I have this picture, and I didn't realize until a few years later that there are these two massive orbs, and I feel they're maybe more angelic. And you can see the purple silhouette around them, but you can see that they're actually traveling upward, they're not going down. And oh my goodness, just, when you start seeing things, these sorts of things, you can't unsee them, So,
And where can you read about this? You said that you've done a lot of research.
yeah.
Is it numerology, or what are the sort of things that you look up?
Look it up. What is it that you're interested in? Look up orbs, look up numerology. This is what it's all about. It's just starting to research. That's how I started. I started doing courses. I found myself interested in doing things. My interest became sacred geometry. Hence, I created a deck of cards all based on sacred geometry. The reason why.
Yeah. And can you talk us through that?
Yeah. So when I said I started creating, playing with essences and making crystal essences, what I eventually did was that from probably about 2010 onwards, I actually started creating elixirs. And the elixirs, because they're a synergy of energy that you're putting together. And what I ended up doing is I've actually got a whole set
Wow.
of vibrational elixirs. So you have probably heard of flower essences. You've probably heard of, your bath remedies that you can buy even from the chemist. Well, they're based on the same ideal where you're working with a certain energy, and it's a frequency in water. Okay. And these I've created, like, so you're working as a complementary therapy, and they're working on the mind, body, and soul. It's all about nurturing, balancing, healing all aspects of ourselves. Again, complementary, it doesn't, you don't stop taking whatever medication you're on for it. It works fine, and it will not interfere with anything because it's frequency. It's an energy that is, kept within a water. So what then started happening was when I started creating them, I would create these templates, and use these templates to then make my elixirs. And it got to a point that I could no longer create the templates on my own. I was finding that what I was channeling was just becoming more and more complex. Like it was just too hard for me to even, cut and paste, which was what I was really good at doing back in the day. And so I found myself a digital artist. And what he did for me is I would send him my cuttings and pastings and say, this is the concept that I have. Can you help me? Can you put them and create a template for me? So the very first one I did, because it was based on spider and spider medicine. So what I created was
Dreamweaver.
this view might look like a web, but the actual makeup within the web is based on a particular geometry that I call Metatron's cube. And I just couldn't visualize how to do that and create it on my own. So I needed his help. From that, I then saw my second one, and this is the Merkaba, okay, the star tetrahedron, working with this. And I've gone, oh my God, can you create it for me? There's another one I would like to create. And then it went on and on and on.
Yeah, right. That's quite a complex shape. It almost looks like when you look through a kaleidoscope.
Absolutely. It gives you that look. This is Metatron's
Yeah.
cube. And the complexity of it is there. But for me, like rebirth is all about snake medicine because it's that next level of transmutation. It's shedding your skin. And this is what we are always going through when we're going through that phoenix moment of birth, death, and rebirth.
And how do you use the cards?
So they're an oracle that I've actually called them a healing deck of cards. And they are actually used. So because, again, everything has an energy signature. So for me, and each one of these cards has its own meaning, just as the water frequencies do. So with this, you can actually lie it on the body. You could lie it under the table, if you're working. So I do have a number of chiropractors, kinesiologists that actually work with these cards and they use it within their healing work as well. Or you could actually get a glass of water, you could sit it on the top and you could leave it overnight or during the day. And remember, everything is with intention, okay? With that intention, you are then, absorbing the energy of this template into your water. These can then be used as a grid. And you could get crystals, you can get fur, you could get fruit, you could get names or a person's name. You can take a picture of whatever it might be. It doesn't matter. It's about what your perception is, what it is your intention is, and then what it is that you're going to create and how you're going to place all the aspects of your pieces to create a grid that you want to create. All of this, you can see things like this on my website as well.
And just going back to your Phoenix elixirs, is that something you drink or something you place on the body?
Drink.
Okay.
So they've got alcohol in them. They're kept with alcohol, very minimal. But you drink them, you can put them in your water, you can put them in your food, you can carry them. Like for the last 2 days, I've actually had one in my bra, because I just want to be with that energy signature. I've been drinking it. So, I've still been taking it but I want to keep the frequency around me as well. So yes, you can use it in all different ways. There's not one way. You can actually even go onto my website and on the homepage, you can download a PDF on the liquid alchemy bottle. So, when the phoenix actually, or like the phoenix like you see it here, the phoenix like you see it on the back of my cards. This is all about my life. And to me, from very early on, saw myself as the phoenix because it's my story of birth, death, and rebirth. It's for every time. It's not about the physical death. It's about an energetic death that we have gone through because we're either through our loss, our letting go, we've gone through that one level. It's time to raise our vibration. And this is what we are here to learn. This is what we're here to do this is part of what I was saying before. For me, It's not just about love and love of self, which is so important because that brings in so many other aspects of self-awareness and self-worth and being enough. But it's that raising our consciousness, it's awakening that consciousness within ourselves. And as we do that, we're able to shift to these higher levels of frequencies that we get to a point that we will be eventually be able to drop those lower frequencies of anger and fear and pain and come just from that higher vibration of love, and more balance. And this is what we're here to do. And each one of us chose to come here for a reason at this point in time. And each one of us has also chosen the lessons we are here to learn. And for some, they are tragic, you know, whether it's a plane cat. I mean, this is awful to say, but you're going from your plane crashes or your major accidents or your sexual abuse or to having cancer and death. These are our teachings. I can't tell you why we chose them, but I very much believe that we choose that blueprint before we come here. My husband's dying, my brother-in-law's dying, my mother's dying, my stepmother, they're dying. I mean, they're all there to teach us something. It wasn't just happening to them, it's also happening for us. And I can tell you, my mother in law passed away in 2017. She had a major heart attack. I can tell you, she died of a very broken heart. When we think about the heart as the organ and an association to it, of course, there are other aspects involved, but this is a very big part of her dying. And she had the choice to rectify that, but she never did.
And so, given the knowledge that you have now, when you look back retrospectively on your experiences, what
Mhm.
do you feel those experiences have shared with you?
Oh God, so many. I don't fear death. And that's something that definitely changed after I had loss and found myself. I had such a thirst for the esoteric, that gnosis, the knowing, the spiritual that's out there. And I still do. Like I go down more rabbit holes than you can think of. But that's okay because we're all entitled to a belief system and our perception.
And if you don't mind me asking, what was your heritage, Emily?
So my background is the European heritage, and I had a very mixed, very, very, very mixed. The Polish, the German, the Israeli, and then my children, it was, we went into a mixed marriage. So, and I just want to really stress that I do not follow religion. It never impacted on my immediate family ever. That was my choice. And my husband as well, because we were both brought into different faith.
What were you originally when you raised?
Well, the religious part aspect is Jewish,
Jewish?
and my husband Catholic. So very, very mixed. Uh,
Mm.
but I don't go there. I just don't go there. I'm not into religion whatsoever. And I feel religion, sadly, even though people use it because they need a faith and something to believe in, and that's okay. But religion has also destroyed so much of our world and the peace that we have within it because it's been used for all the wrong reasons. And I actually want to just, in saying that, neither of us believed in God at the time. So, and you got to remember at that point, I'll explain why I say this in a minute, but neither of us believed in God by the time just before he died because we couldn't understand. There was that anger. Why are you taking him away from me? He's not ready. He doesn't want to die. But understanding that on a higher level, his soul made this contract. This is what his life was to be. He didn't even make it to 38. I'm 52 and I'm well past the year that he passed.
Yeah.
But because we lost so much faith, we both said there's not going to be any church. Like we didn't get married in church. We got married in the gardens anyway. No religion's going to come into, the wake. It's all going to just be done by a
Celebrant?
yeah, thank you, a celebrant. And that's what we did. We had a celebrant just as we got married, a celebrant when we got married, a celebrant when he passed. And I think one of the things that's really, really important to understand, and the audience may or may not understand this, but when we are told that we are made in the eyes of God, that is the truth. You know, there is God, it's as above, so below. The God that is out there, or the consciousness that we consider a God, is also the consciousness of what we have within ourselves. So what is out there on one level is what we also have within ourselves. It's we are God because we are made in exact likeness of God. And to say that there is just, one God, it doesn't, this is again opening up, I guess, a rabbit hole, which, I don't need to go down, but it's just that understanding that, you know, religion was created, but before the religion was there, everyone was the same. We were all the same in our belief systems and, the way in which we came into the world to go out into the world. So religion was then created to control. And this we can see through the churches and what it created from that. And, I think it hasn't done a lot of good for a lot of people either. So in saying this, for me, I take my religion is my spirituality. It is what I see and what I know and what I understand. And that's how I see my life. And I think it's just so much more beautiful because it doesn't restrict you to being in this tiny little box where you have to be told that you have to, it's like, do you really believe, for example, I say for the Jewish people that, oh, here comes the Sabbath, you're not allowed to touch lights, you're not allowed to drive, you're not allowed to, you know, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. Do you really think he wrote that and put it in a Bible? I don't think so. Like, when you start thinking about certain aspects, you go, where does this come from? Where do these stipulations come in? But again, mean it to be about religion because I don't practice and I don't go there.
Mm.
I just believe in my own stuff.
Well, you've certainly found your own spirituality, and growth since the deaths of your loved ones. Given your personal experience,
Mhm.
is there any advice or encouragement that you'd like to share?
Don't ever give up. Don't allow the grief to consume you. There is always help out there. And don't ever feel embarrassed, if you feel you can't ask for that help because you would be surprised. You just have to turn your head and there would be someone there willing to offer it. My children were very young at the time. So at that time, I had amazing support systems in place. I actually got them all art therapy. So that lasted, I can't remember now how long I did it for, but through the council, I was able to get them art therapy so that they had a form of expression. I joined a group at the time, and I honestly don't even know if it still exists, but it's just there are groups out there. It was called Kids Grieve Too. So we would send the kids there because remember, my brother in law died 2 weeks before. And so he had two girls, young girls as well. And so, you know, all the kids would go together to these meetings, and my youngest son, who was 7 at the time when my mum died, what was really interesting, so I had counseling for him at the time and each one of them went through their own thing. Like, remember, we're all individuals. So school's not going to be for everyone, just like certain therapy and counseling is not going to be for everyone. I'm just vaguely remembering I had another counselor actually over at the Austin Hospital at the time as well, which we saw a few times. Actually, that was more for me than it was for the children. So, I had a lot of things in place. But my son, being 7, he told my mum he wouldn't let her die. She died. Children have such concrete ways, their way of thinking is so concrete that he really believed it was his fault that she died. And it wasn't, we had to go through counseling because he had to understand that it wasn't his fault. He couldn't have saved her. So it's really, really important to have something in place for your children. Take any support you can get, even if it's about, meals being prepped for you. Accept whatever comes, because you're going to need that support as best you can, at that point in time, and find something as the parent. It's okay to grieve. You need to have that process. It's also, I think, so important to understand that grief doesn't ever go away. It just gets so much easier to deal with the further down the track you are. So, even 20 years later, actually, for my mum at 17, I sat on the couch that weekend I met you, and it was the weekend I did my knee, and I was watching something, and it just brought tears to my eyes because it made me miss not only my mum actually, but my mother-in-law. And I was actually saying out aloud, I miss you, I miss you. So no, it's okay to still have those moments of tears. One of the things that we've done also, and this worked really well, especially having young children, we stopped doing it probably after about 10 years. But with my husband, what we did on his anniversary every year is we would go. So he's buried in Faulkner. So we used to go and visit him. I don't go anymore, but we used to go to the cemetery once a year. I would take the kids, and then we would go to a restaurant in Sydney Road, and we'd celebrate his life. That was really important for the children, and it worked really well with my mum. One of the things we did, and we still get together now because for my sisters, I think it's more important. But, well, they feel that necessity, because there's such an age gap between all our children. But when we first started, after she first passed, we would get butterflies. You can buy butterflies and you can release them. But we actually stopped doing that because we found the weather was getting a bit cool because she died in the May. So we would meet at a park and we would do that. And then, there were times where we would let a balloon go, but then you realize they were very bad for the environment. So we stopped doing that. That was long time ago. And then what we've been doing over the last however many years now is we get rose petals and we collect rose petals, and then we all get together and just to keep the memory alive. It's like, just say one thing about, Nanny that you remember, or one thing that, because not all the grandchildren met her, sadly. So, what is the memory that you've been told of most, by a parent, or hearing us chatting between friends. So there are so many things to do to keep these memories alive, and I think it's really, really important.
Emily, that is really beautiful and really great advice for people who may be going through a similar situation. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's just been amazing. I appreciate it.
Don't be caught dead forgetting to subscribe. And here are some more videos we know you'll love.